Good evening, Meg and Dolores. Thank you for joining me on our Zoom meeting tonight. I know you both have had a lot of time and have been emailing back and forth about all the different ideas you want to bring to the table for our program. I think for the community center, it'd be a really great thing that we introduce domestic violence as a topic. I think the people in our area and the parents and families we have in the area will think it's a really good topic, and I think we'll get a lot of people to come in. I'm just gonna bring up these slides and we'll start a Zoom meeting very soon. I hope it's okay, but I will start the meeting and I'll talk about my first one. My first one is about a few statistics I found and some overall definitions of what domestic violence is. And then I'll swing it over to Megan. She'll take on, I think she has a couple things she wants to cover in this meeting, and then she'll pass it on to Dolores and we'll go from there. All right, I'm gonna get started very soon. One moment. Thank you girls for your patience. I'm just loading up the slides here. Okay, so all my information was found from Canadian sources. The Department of Justice of Canada from 2023 is where I found most of my stuff on the government website. And a few of my statistics are for 2021 as well as Canadian Justice, the government websites. Let's get into it. Domestic violence in terms is referred to as identifying situations of family violence involving an adult intimate partner that are living together. Another word for domestic violence is IPV, which is interpartner violence, which I have just gone over. This can be a very scary thing as a person's safe space, usually one's home, can be a very dangerous place for them. Women tend to experience this more than men, unfortunately, and Canadian police reports that women are 79% of domestic violences, and this was in 2021. Domestic violence also in Canadian statistics are the highest, most common form of violence and the most experienced by women. Other types of violence can be sexual and physical violence, and shown as a very high rating as well. Police show that data that is 30% of all violence is experienced from an intimate partner, which is that IPV violence. And we don't always consider that children can experience a lot with being in the household of domestic violence, and it can have a huge impact on them as well. Children that watch or directly involved with IPV can also be a form of different forms of child abuse, which I did not know. Whether it's direct or they're just in the household, that could affect them so highly that it's considered child abuse. As they are part of the family living in the household and coexisting in that environment, this violence can show different sorts of behavior, and children can experience much trauma and stress through it. Children might be more sensitive at times. They tend to change their behavior, be tense or jumpy, could be afraid of a certain parent as a situation in the household can arise. And not everyone will consider this a big impact on a child, as it's the partners that are going through the violence and being the one source of it. But as children, through children research, we understand that children take on their environment, and as well as they feel and understand what's going on through their parents, and they don't really know anything else besides their parents, so they can take on a lot that we don't know they take on. According to the Department of Justice, children can suffer emotional, physical, cognitive, and behavioral problems just by growing up in the household of domestic violence. Even if they're kept out of it, any sort of form they can sense or understand. The stress and anxiety alone can be detrimental to their developing brains and cause unnecessary pressure on them, which could cause lasting impacts in their future. Domestic violence could involve the child sometimes, actually, and it can cause physical harm to them as well. One statistic I found through researching was cases between the years of 2008 and 2018 showed that 34% of family homicides that had a child as a victim and the parent that was accused had already an underlying history of family violence occurring in the family. So before even knowing what was going on, and after the incident of, unfortunately, the homicide, they found out that the family was already struggling with violence, and not knowing this, it could have been a factor to what inevitably happened, unfortunately, which is such a hard thing to hear and understand. And that's 20 years between that, and 34% of that could experience, it was shown to experience underlying family violence. Showing that the past history of domestic violence could have played a factor is an unfortunate situation. Sometimes in these difficult situations, children are in the crossfire and are absorbed in their environment and go through the same things that their parents are going through. And we can exhibit this, teachers, educators can exhibit this through their school environment. Family members can see the difference. You can see the disconnect that the child is going through as this domestic violence is occurring in the household. And this should never have happened in the first place. When we run this workshop, Meg and Doris, I want to just be clarified to the parents that this is not the child's fault. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. They are not at fault. This is not anything to do with them. They should have never been there in the first place. So we need to make sure, because obviously parents will feel guilty, and children, if they're older, might feel it's their fault or their responsibility in this. It's not. We need to make a good point of that. It's an important note to touch on when we deliver the information. And this is my first one, so I'm gonna give it over to Meg, and she'll go through her I think she has a couple questions, and you can take it away, Meg. Thank you.
Good evening, Anna. Thank you so much for inviting me to this meeting to talk about domestic violence. So I would like to talk about the impact it has on children from infant to adolescence years. So I came upon this article. It's called Development Consequences of Intimate Partner Violence on Children. So I've learned a lot. I've learned that children who have experienced this domestic violence during their infancy toddler years can become impacted in several ways. So we have physically, children may go through adverse birth outcomes and altered stress response system, sleep disturbance, and difficulty with physiological regulation because of prenatal and early exposure to chronic stress. Socio-emotionally, children may have a higher risk of emotional dysregulation, fearfulness, insecure attachment, and a hard time trusting their caregivers. Behaviorally, children may experience an increased amount of crying, clinginess, irritation, and withdrawal issues. Cognitively, they may experience chronic stress, which can affect their daily routine, unfortunately, and inconsistent interactions with their caregivers. So this can lead to what I'll be talking on further on in a discussion about attachment issues. For example, having an insecure or anxious attachment with your caregiver, and how this can be impacting a child for their future relationships, because they'll have harder time if they don't have a positive relationship with their caregiver, with knowing how a relationship is supposed to be, and they might have a hard time with their partner relationships, which I will get into later on. So they could also have delays with their language development, executive function, attention, and early on learning skills. At this age, as I said, the attachment is very important, the formation of it, and self-regulation is crucial. And being exposed to this domestic violence in their household may impact their function later on in life as adults. So now we'll go into the children who have experienced domestic violence during the ages of 3 to 12. They will have a chance of experiencing anxiety, emotional insecurity, aggression, impulsivity, fear, and find a hard time socializing with their friends and peers. So you might see them kind of withdrawing in the classroom or playing alone by themselves, not wanting to interact with anybody else. They will also go through hard time, stress-related health problems, paying attention, hard time with concentrating in class, disruption, sleeping problems, irritation, and delays in language and emotional development. So at these ages, obviously when they're younger, as a toddler, they weren't really understanding because your brain isn't developed, your baby. So as they got older, unfortunately, they will start to understand what's going on between their caregivers, and it's not very healthy for their brain development. And also they could think that this is normal, whatever's happening at home, if they have not seen a healthy and positive relationship before, to experience and to be able to compare it to know it's not okay. So now we talk about the adolescents who have experienced domestic violence. It may they may be impacted in more crucial areas of functioning. So physically, they may go through stress-related health problems again, like they all do. Every age group has their own different stress-related health problems. Increased amount of risk of substance usage, like coping strategy could be the uses of alcohol and drugs, unfortunately, because they don't know if they don't have support intervention, this would be the only way to cope with what's going on and kind of distraction from it. And sleep interruption. Socio-emotionally, they may go through depression, withdrawal, PTSD, feeling trauma, and low self-esteem, and a hard time focusing and forming healthy relationships with their partners, as I said before, because they don't have a comparison basically to know that like what is right from wrong. And with their identity development, they may also become delinquent, aggressive, and be at risk for substance abuse and violent towards their romantic partners, as I said before. If they just grew up with a violent caregivers, they might think it's normal, like to hit, for example. And they could have a hard time with making decisions under stress or pressure. They would connect their ability to focus as well, and the problems with like cognitive development will be connected to this, and a reduced amount of executive functioning, and a hard time with educational attainment and planning for the future, unfortunately. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the different theories that connect to domestic violence that I found very interesting. So the first one is the John Bowlby's attachment theory, second one is Piaget cognitive development theory, and the third one is the Bronfenbrenner's, sorry for my pronunciation if it's wrong, ecological system. So the first one we have about John Bowlby attachment theory. It discusses the importance of relationships between the child and the caregiver and the development and benefits of its impact it has for the child. So some of the benefits is the child will be able to have trust, good communication, emotional support, independence, a high self-esteem, and conflict resolution with a caregiver. However, if children have been exposed and witnessed to domestic violence, they may develop insecure attachment, which may lead to a hard time being able to trust their caregivers now, and inability to build healthy relationships. This could also affect their future relationships. For children to have a secure attachment with their caregivers, they need to feel safe by having a consistent and responsive caregiver, so they'd be able to depend on them. If a child experiences domestic violence, this process can be interrupted though. As a result, a child can start to feel unsafe in their household, emotional dysregulation, and develop anxiety issues. This will make them not able to have close relationships further on in their life, as I mentioned before. Now I talk about the second one I mentioned, the Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological system. So this theory discusses how a child's development is influenced by several environmental systems, which is also known as microsystems, especially the family environment, so the household. So domestic violence in the household can have a direct impact on a child's emotional well-being, the behavior and ability to feel safe, and the relationship with the caregivers will also be affected. Children could develop emotional dysregulation, as I said before, anxiety, depression, insecure attachment, and could possibly lead to aggressive behavior and acting out. The stress a child may develop from the household can affect their academic capabilities. So like example, we said before, the school readiness, it could affect their paying attention, being attentive, withdrawal, all those things are connected. Conflict in the household may also lead to children being able to lash out, and like because of the anger, then the confusion, they tend to act out more. Teachers may also notice that child starting to have aggression, as I said before, withdrawal symptoms and emotional distress because they're very confused at home and not know what's going on. So this could also connect to the concentration, because if they're confused at home and they bring it to school, they won't be able to focus on what's going on because their mind is going through a bunch of things at the same time, not understanding and not being able to process, especially without any support to understand what's happening. However, not every child will have the same experience, and even though it's all domestic violence, every child can have different experience and they can be affected in different ways, and it depends on the development impact of the violence. It depends on the child's age, how long the violence lasted for, and if the child got support or any interventions to help them process and to understand what is happening. And obviously for strategies to help them get through it. The last one we have is G and Piaget cognitive development theory and intimate partner violence. So we have here where he discusses that children form knowledge about the world through the interactions within the environments they're in. So it states that cognitive development happens in time, so as they get older basically and more mature, and the thinking changes as they get older, have more experiences in life, go through things, and become more aware of what's happening. So even though it focuses on cognitive development instead of emotions and relationships, it also explains how domestic violence affects children's understanding, thinking, and their view of what they experience. Children who have experienced domestic violence may have a hard time concentrating, as I mentioned before, academic capability, and think negatively about relationships, and have a hard time understanding what is going on in their household. As I said before, this is when they are in the younger stages though. And lastly, children may also develop chronic stress, which will affect their learning, exploring, and engagement within the environment. And chronic stress is also one of the biggest stresses that it affects their daily routine and what is a constant thing to do every day. So this is very crucial that it can interrupt this process. And of course, without any intervention or support, it can get worse and it could progress to long-term effects.
Thank you, Megan and Anna, for providing such insightful information regarding such a sensitive topic. Now I'll be moving on to the effect the source of stress or trauma has on daily lives of children, youth, and families, as well as providing research-based considerations and recommendations when providing support to families and children impacted by the source of stress or trauma. And before I start, I would like to share that all the information that I've been providing is fully drawn from peer-reviewed research on domestic violence and its effect on children and families. So after conducting my research, I discovered that children who live in households where there is domestic violence are affected across multiple areas of development, such as the way they grow, the way they learn, the way they think, or even the way they interact with others when it comes to relationships or creating relationships. So studies have found that children that are exposed to domestic violence frequently exhibit symptoms of depression, PTSD, and aggression, alongside with reduced academic achievement and compromised social skills, meaning that children that are exposed to domestic violence are more likely to do academically poor in school compared to children that do not face domestic violence, and are also more likely to have difficulties creating friendship, relationship with peers, or even educators. Daily activities such as sleeping, maintaining focus in school, and feeling safe within the home environment become very, very challenging for those children, unfortunately. And there has also been a high rate of physical health problems, and poor sleep quality further impair a child's ability to function day to day. It is also important to note that age shapes how stress is manifest among children. So the way a younger child would manifest symptoms is different from the way an older child would manifest symptoms of domestic violence. So, for example, younger children may present their excessive crying or clinging behaviors, and while older children and adolescent will be more showing it through withdrawals, engaging in acting out behaviors, or experiencing difficulties forming or maintaining healthy friendships or relationships in different environments, such as school. So now we're going to move on to the effect it has on parent-caregiver relationship, which is very important. So research has demonstrated that domestic violence has a profound impact on caregivers. So mothers surviving trauma may find it extremely difficult to remain emotionally available or connected to the children. And that is not due to the lack of love for the children, but rather to a direct consequence of managing ongoing trauma or fear. This disruption affects the critical bonding process, which can result in insecure attachment in children. In essence, the child develops a belief that they cannot rely on their caregiver for safety or emotional support. This relational insecurity frequently extends beyond the home, affecting relationships with teachers and peers as well. So sometimes the caregiving relationship does not only start from home, but it also goes beyond home, which means at school they could have those relationship barriers with their educators or friends. And yeah. Therefore, it is essential that we acknowledge caregivers in these circumstances also as victims, because their difficulties in providing care are a reflection of a significant impact trauma has on a person's capacity to function, rather than an absence of care for the child. So now the general question is, how do we provide help? What are the recommendations that we could give to families and children impacted by the source of trauma or stress? So I've came up with 2 recommendations. The first one is child parent psychotherapy, known as CPP, which is an evidence-based intervention that addresses the need of both the caregiver and the child within a single treatment model. So this treatment is rooted into the attachment theory, focusing on repairing the relational bond that has been disrupted as a result of trauma exposure. The intervention targets key areas including emotional and behavioral regulation, developmental guidance, and the promotion of responsive and sensitive interaction patterns between caregiver and child. As the caregiver develops greater responsiveness and the child begins to feel safe and supported, both are better positioned for meaningful recovery. The second recommendation is the trauma-informed, culturally responsive support across all systems. So research supports the need for consistent systemic support that extends beyond the home into schools, healthcare settings, and child welfare services. And this requires equipping professionals including teachers, pediatricians, and social workers with the knowledge and tools to recognize signs of domestic violence exposure and respond in ways that avoid further harm to the family. For example, a child displaying disruptive behaviors while in a classroom may be processing a traumatic event witnessed the previous evening or the previous day. System-wide implementation of trauma-informed care has been shown to reduce immediate distress and mitigate the risk of long-term difficulties for both children and their caregivers. Thank you for being present, and we hope that all these meaningful information that we've been providing will be helping those families and children in need of support on domestic violence.
Okay, this is great. Megan, Dolores, thank you. I think we have a wide range on different sort of things we touched on for domestic violence. I think this is going to be great for the workshop and the program we're going to run. I'm just gonna wrap up our Zoom meeting. We could have a good night. I just thought of my own recommendations for the future research. I think there's a few things we could consider next time. Just thoughts off the top of my head, and we'll brainstorm them and we can think about them for after we run our program. We're gonna get a lot of feedback from the parents as well, and that's what we want. So here's just a few things I considered. So when conducting our research on the topic of domestic violence, a few recommendations that I thought what we should consider about learning from this topic is maybe forms of domestic violence through the digital world, so social media. We could maybe research strength-based approaches and interventions to support children, as well as maybe specific effects on diverse groups, and then long-term effects on adults. So when we touched on violence, we touched on this experience physically, social, emotionally, cognitively, yet there's another experience probably through social media when we consider it. There could be domestic violence going on there. So I think that would be interesting to do research on that, see what the internet has its effects on domestic violence, because we all know that social media comes with its perks, but also has a negative space for children. This can be another form of violence towards children and create effects on them too. That's what I'm thinking. It would just be really good to research. I think that would be a very good thing to learn about. And then strength-based approaches and interventions. This is very important. I know we're running a course about teaching about what domestic violence is, but maybe we should consider later doing some good strength-based approaches and interventions. It's also important to research to understand, to support the families we're working with, and to support the children. This could be supporting them if they've experienced it or prevent an experience. It would be knowledgeable to learn about strategies to support children working through them. Children might experience trauma or PTSD through domestic violence situations. It's good for educators too, if they want to come in, teachers, parents, other adults working with kids, to know how to support children with past situations. Domestic violence can affect many people differently, and it could be a target for specific groups and ethnic groups of people. So researching on the effects specifically, I know there's when I was researching Indigenous people, the effects and what's going on there, that could be a whole other topic to learn about, and other ethnic groups, of course. And then researching ongoing situations of domestic violence with different cultural backgrounds would be essential for information for learning about this topic, because it's not always touched on as well, unfortunately. It's heavily focused normally on specific people rather than others, so we need to focus on everybody so we have knowledge for everybody. And then through this, we kind of focused on ages from birth to 18 of domestic violence, but it would also be good information to learn research on long-term effects for adults, because we don't know what they're dealing with, and how, when they experience domestic violence, where it's lead them to today, and how it affects them, and if they've gotten help or not. So into adulthood would be a good thing, how adults handle their past experiences and what the effects have them on to this day. I overall think, ladies, though, our research was covered, different variations, different topics, different questions were covered on domestic violence. If there's still some recommended areas we could speak on to gain knowledge on this topic. But anyways, that's to conclude our Zoom meeting tonight. I really appreciate you, Meg and Dolores. We'll touch base in a few weeks to organize creating this program in the community center and put it up, and maybe run the program in about a month, we'll say. But this is a great start. I really appreciate you guys having this meeting, and I think we did a great job. So I'll say good night, bye, and we'll speak soon.